In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless medieval manuscript, the Book of St. Alban, vanishes from a locked publisher's safe, leaving no trace. Enter Miss Jane Marple, whose sharp eyes and quiet wisdom unravel a web of secrets. Was it the debt-ridden editor, the ambitious writer, the nervous intern, or the obsessive collector? Lord Carver? As whispers of greed and betrayal ripple through the village, Miss Marple sets a cunning trap, revealing a thief driven not by money, but by a dangerous passion to possess beauty itself. In a world where everyone hides something, only one truth will emerge. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Prize. The late summer sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage. She sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting needles clicking with the steady rhythm of a metronome, a ball of soft gray wool unraveling in her lap. The village was unusually abuzz, and Cherry, her young maid, burst into the parlor with the morning's gossip, her cheeks flushed from the short walk from the post office. "Miss Marple, have you heard?" Cherry said, setting down a tray of tea and scones. "Harrow and Sons, the publishers, they've got their hands on something extraordinary, a medieval manuscript, the Book of St. Alban, all covered in gold and colors like you wouldn't. Essay system. Wouldn't believe. They say it's worth a fortune, and now—" She paused, catching her breath. "It's gone, stolen right from their office last night." Miss Marple's needles paused, her pale blue eyes lifting with interest. "Stolen, you say? How very intriguing. Tell me more, Cherry." Cherry, ever eager to share, perched on the edge of a chair. "The postman told me this morning. It was locked in a safe at Harrow and Sons, behind a portrait of some old duke or other. Not a scratch on the safe, no broken windows, nothing. Mr. Harrow's in a state, they say. The manuscript was meant for a big exhibition tomorrow, and now it's vanished into thin air." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind already turning. "A manuscript of such value," she mused, "and no sign of forced entry. That suggests a certain familiarity with the premises, does it not?" Cherry blinked, unaccustomed to her employer's sharp insights. "I suppose so, miss. The constable's been called, but he's no match for a thief like that. Everyone's talking about it at the shops." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her thoughts drifting to the nature of theft. In her experience, greed and opportunity often danced a close waltz. "I think I shall take a walk to Harrow and Sons this afternoon," she said, rising with a sprightliness that belied her years. "A little fresh air will do me good, and perhaps I might offer Mr. Harrow some comfort." By 2 o'clock, Miss Marple was at the door of Harrow and Sons, a modest brick building tucked between the village bakery and a haberdashery. The "He" sign above the door gleamed with fresh polish, a testament to Mr. Harrow's pride in his small but reputable publishing house. He greeted her himself, his thin face drawn with worry, his usually impeccable suit slightly askew. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come," he said, ushering her into the cramped office. His voice was tight, like a string about to snap. "I'm at my wit's end. The manuscript, the Book of St. Alban, it's irreplaceable. Centuries old, illuminated by hand, and now it's gone." Miss Marple patted his arm gently, her eyes scanning the room. It was a scholarly chaos of books and papers, with a heavy oak desk dominating the space. Behind it hung a portrait of a stern-faced nobleman, presumably the old duke Cherry had mentioned. "Tell me everything, Mr. Harrow," she said, settling into a chair. "Every detail matters." Mr. Harrow ran a hand through his thinning hair. "It was locked in the safe last night," he said, pointing to the portrait. "I checked it myself before leaving at 6. This morning, when I opened the safe to prepare it for the exhibition, it was gone. The lock wasn't tampered with, and the windows were secure. I don't understand how anyone could have got in." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the portrait, then moved to the safe behind it, now swung open to reveal a stack of papers, but no manuscript. She rose and approached the safe, her fingers brushing the cold metal. "A combination lock, I see, and who knows the combination?" "Only myself and Mr. Fenton, my editor," Mr. Harrow replied. "But Giles Fenton is above reproach. He's been with me for years, a man of impeccable character." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral. She noticed a faint layer of dust on the safe's edge, undisturbed except for a small smudge. Her eyes then drifted to the floor, where a single scuff mark marred the polished wood near the desk. "And the staff? Who was here last night?" "Giles was editing a manuscript, Miss Wren was reviewing proofs, and young Tommy Blake, our intern, was cataloging books in the back room. Oh, and Lord Carver stopped by to discuss a potential acquisition. He's a collector, you know, mad for rare books." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away names and roles. "Lord Carver, you say? A man of refined tastes, no doubt." She moved to the window, testing the latch. It was firm, but not impossible to manipulate with the right tool. "And no one else had access?" "No one," Mr. Harrow said, his voice breaking. "I've called the constable, but he's more suited to lost cats than this. Miss Marple, I know you've helped with delicate matters before. Could you possibly—" "I shall do what I can," she said, her smile reassuring but her eyes sharp as needles. "People are not so mysterious, Mr. Harrow. They leave traces even when they think they don't." As she left the office, Miss Marple paused on the threshold, glancing back at the room. The scuff mark, the smudged safe, the loose latch, they were like stitches in a pattern, waiting to be sewn together. She stepped into the warm afternoon, her mind already threading the needle. Chapter 2. The Cast of Characters. Miss Jane Marple walked slowly back to her cottage, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead's High Street. The village was alive with its usual hum. Mrs. Price sorting letters at the post office, the baker's boy darting between shops with fresh loaves, and a gaggle of children playing near the churchyard. Yet, beneath this familiar rhythm, Miss Marple sensed a current of unease, as if the theft of the Book of St. Alban had cast a shadow over the village's placid surface. Her mind, sharp as the needles in her knitting bag, was already at work, sorting the threads of what she had seen and heard at Harrow and Sons. The theft was no ordinary crime. A manuscript of such rarity, locked in a safe with no signs of tampering, suggested not only cunning but intimacy with the publisher's office. "Someone who knew the place well," she murmured to herself, pausing to nod at Mrs. Bantry, who was pruning roses outside her gate. Mrs. Bantry, ever eager for news, called out, but Miss Marple deflected with a polite smile, promising tea later. She needed quiet to think, to lay out the players in this little drama as carefully as she arranged her wool skeins. Back in her parlor, she settled into her armchair, the fire crackling softly, despite the mild August day. Cherry, bustling in with a fresh pot of tea, was full of questions, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "Cherry, my dear, fetch me my notebook, the one with the blue cover." Cherry obeyed, and soon Miss Marple was jotting down names. Giles Fenton, Clara Wren, Tommy Blake, Lord Reginald Carver. Each, Mr. Harrow had confirmed, had access to the office. Each, she suspected, had a secret waiting to be unraveled, like a knot in a tangled stitch. She began with Giles Fenton, the editor. A man of middle age, with a scholar's stoop and a reputation for precision, he had been with Harrow and Sons for nearly a decade. Mr. Harrow trusted him implicitly, but Miss Marple knew trust could blind one to subtle flaws. She recalled his spectacles, perpetually sliding down his nose, and the faint tremor in his voice when he'd greeted her at the office. Was it merely the shock of the theft, or something deeper? Gossip, that invaluable currency of village life, hinted at debts, cards or horses, no one was quite sure. A man in debt, she wrote, is a man under pressure, and pressure makes one careless. Next was Clara Wren, the writer. Young, ambitious, with a mane of auburn hair and eyes that sparked with intensity, she was a rising star in historical fiction. Her novels, rich with medieval detail, had earned her a small but devoted following. Miss Marple had seen her at the office, scribbling in a notebook, her fingers stained with ink. Clara had spoken briefly of the Book of St. Alban, her voice alight with passion for its artistry. But there was a fierceness in her, a hunger for recognition that Miss Marple recognized from other young women she'd known, women who, when thwarted, could act rashly. Ambition, she noted, is a fire that warms or burns. Then there was Tommy Blake, the intern. Barely 20, with a shock of untidy hair and a stammer that worsened under scrutiny, he seemed an unlikely thief. Yet his eagerness to please, his late hours at the office, suggested a desperation to prove himself. Miss Marple had noticed his worn jacket, the cuffs frayed, and the heavy satchel he carried, slung awkwardly over one shoulder. Was he merely diligent or hiding something? Youth, she wrote, is often underestimated, but it can be bold in its innocence. Finally, Lord Reginald Carver, the collector, a man of wealth and refinement. His estate on the edge of St. Mary Mead was a monument to his passion for rare books. Miss Marple had met him once at a village fete, where his charm had disarmed even the most skeptical matrons. Yet there was an intensity in his gaze when he spoke of his collection, a possessiveness that bordered on obsession. He had visited Harrow and Sons the day before the theft, ostensibly to discuss acquisitions. A collector, she wrote, sees value where others see beauty, and value contempt even the most honorable. Miss Marple closed her notebook and sipped her tea, now lukewarm. The suspects were like characters in one of Clara Wren's novels, each with their own motives, their own shadows. To understand them, she needed to see them in their natural settings, where guards were lowered and truths slipped out like stitches from a dropped needle. She decided to begin at the publisher's tea room, a small room adjacent to the office where staff gathered daily. It was, she knew, a place where tongues wagged and secrets spilled. The tea room was a cozy nook, its walls lined with faded prints of old manuscripts. A kettle hissed on a sideboard, and the air smelled of scones and strong tea. Miss Marple arrived just as the staff break began, her presence accepted with polite surprise. Giles Fenton sat at a corner table, adjusting his spectacles as he pored over a proof sheet. Clara Wren stood by the window, her notebook open, her pen flying across the page. Tommy Blake fumbled with a tray of biscuits, his face reddening as one fell to the floor. Lord Carver, unexpectedly present, leaned against the doorframe, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the room's homely charm. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," Lord Carver said, his voice smooth as polished oak. "Have you come to join our little literary circle?" "Merely to enjoy the company," she replied, her smile disarming. She took a seat near Giles, her knitting bag at her feet. "Such a dreadful business about the manuscript. It must be a blow to you all." Giles looked up, his fingers tightening on the proof sheet. "It's a disaster," he said curtly. "Years of work, ruined. That manuscript was to be our crowning achievement." Clara snapped her notebook shut. "It's more than that," she said, her voice sharp. "It's a piece of history, gone because of someone's greed. I'd give anything to know who did it." Tommy, retrieving the fallen biscuit, stammered, I swear it wasn't me, Miss Marple. I was just shelving books last night, I promise." "No one's accusing you, lad," Lord Carver said, his tone paternal but his eyes keen. "Though I wonder why anyone would risk so much for a book, however rare. It's not as if it could be sold easily." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to the tension in the room. She observed Giles's nervous adjustment of his tie, Clara's quick glance at her notebook, Tommy's flushed cheeks, and Lord Carver's studied ease. Each was playing a part, she thought, but whose mask hid the thief? "Books have a way of inspiring passion," she said mildly. "Some might say obsession. I recall a case in my youth, a vicar who stole a rare Bible, not for money, but because he believed it belonged in his church. People's motives are often personal." The room fell silent, save for the kettle's faint whistle. Giles cleared his throat. "Well, I've work to do," he said, rising abruptly. Clara followed, muttering about deadlines. Tommy lingered, wiping the tray with unnecessary vigor. Lord Carver offered Miss Marple a courteous nod before departing, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Alone now, Miss Marple surveyed the tea-room. A crumb on the table, a smudge on the window pane, a faint scratch on the floor near Clara's chair. Small details, but in her experience, details were the threads that wove a case together. She rose, her eyes lingering on the door through which Lord Carver had exited. His presence today, uninvited, was curious. Collectors, she knew, were often collectors of secrets as well. That evening, back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her notebook open again. Cherry, hovering with a tray of supper, couldn't resist. "Any clues, Miss Marple? Who do you think took it?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes distant. "It's too early to say, Cherry, but people are like books. Open them carefully, and you'll find the story they're trying to hide." She turned a page in her notebook, adding a new note. Giles, nervous, possibly hiding debt. Clara, protective of her work, quick to anger. Tommy, eager but anxious, perhaps too eager. Carver, too smooth, too present. She closed the book, her mind already planning her next step. The tea-room had given her a glimpse of the players, but to uncover the thief, she needed to see them in their own worlds, where habits betrayed motives and secrets slipped like dropped stitches. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the manuscript itself. The Book of St. Alban was more than ink and vellum. It was a symbol of desire, whether for wealth, fame, or possession. Whoever had taken it had risked much, but for what? She leaned back, her needles resuming their rhythm, each click a step closer to the truth. Chapter 3. The Editor's Secret. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Giles Fenton's modest flat, a short walk from the village center. The air was cool, scented with damp earth and late summer roses, and she adjusted her shawl, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side. Her visit was ostensibly to return a book she'd borrowed from Harrow and Sons, a thin Juan Mayu system. An excuse. But Miss Marple's mind was as sharp as ever, and she had decided to begin her inquiries with Giles Fenton, the editor, whose nervous demeanor in the tea-room had caught her attention. The whispers of his gambling debts, gleaned from village gossip, lingered in her thoughts like a faint but persistent melody. A man under financial strain, she knew, could be swayed by temptations others might resist. Giles lived in a narrow, ivy-clad building above the village chemist's shop, its windows small and slightly grimy, betraying a bachelor's neglect. Miss Marple climbed the creaking stairs and knocked, her tap precise but gentle. Giles opened the door, his spectacles slightly askew, his shirt rumpled as if he'd slept in it. "Miss Marple?" he said, surprise flickering across his thin face. "What brings you here?" "I was passing by, Mr. Fenton, and thought I'd return that charming volume of medieval poetry you lent me," she said, holding out the book with a smile. "Might I trouble you for a cup of tea?" Giles, ever the gentleman despite his dishevelment, ushered her into a cramped sitting room cluttered with books and manuscripts. The air smelled faintly of ink and tobacco, and a single chair by a small table was cleared for her. As he fussed with a kettle in the tiny kitchenette, Miss Marple's eyes roamed the room. A stack of racing forms peeked from beneath a dictionary, and a letter with a red-inked urgent stamp lay half-hidden under a journal. Her gaze settled on Giles's hands as he returned with a tray. Long fingers, one sporting a faint blue smudge, not uncommon for an editor, but notable for its freshness. "You're too kind to visit, Miss Marple," Giles said, setting down chipped cups. "Though I fear I'm poor company today. This business with the manuscript, it's shaken us all." "I can imagine," she replied, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "Such a loss must weigh heavily on you, Mr. Fenton. You've handled many rare works, haven't you? It must feel like a personal betrayal." Giles's mouth tightened, and he pushed his spectacles up his nose. "It's a catastrophe," he said, his voice clipped. "The Book of St. Alban was a masterpiece. I spent weeks cataloging its details, every flourish, every pigment. To think someone could just take it." His hand shook slightly as he poured the tea, a drop spilling onto the saucer. Miss Marple sipped her tea, its bitterness matching the tension in the room. "You've a scholar's passion, Mr. Fenton. It's rare to see such devotion, though I suppose such responsibility brings its own burdens, the pressure to maintain trust, to manage obligations." Giles's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing his face. "Obligations?" he echoed, his tone wary. "Oh, only the usual sort," she said airily, her needles clicking softly from the bag at her feet. "Work, family, perhaps a debt or two. Life has a way of piling them up, doesn't it?" He stiffened, his fingers brushing the ink stain on his cuff. "I manage well enough," he said too quickly. "My work is my life. I'd never jeopardize it, not for anything." "Of course not," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle but her eyes keen. "Though I've heard whispers, silly village talk, no doubt, of troubles at the card table. Or was it horses? People do exaggerate." Giles's face paled, his cup clattering against its saucer. "Gossip," he said sharply. "I enjoy a flutter now and then, nothing more. Certainly not enough to do anything foolish." He stood, pacing to the window, his back to her. "I'd never touch the manuscript. My reputation, my work, it's all I have." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "I believe you, Mr. Fenton. A man of your principles would never betray his craft. Though I wonder, do you think the thief might have known the safe's combination? Mr. Harrow mentioned only you, and he had it." Giles turned, his eyes narrowing. "Are you suggesting I'd share it? I've never told a soul. Harrow's as careful as I am. If someone got that combination, they didn't get it from me." His voice held a note of defiance, but his hands betrayed him, clenching into fists. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "I'm sure you're right," she said. "I shan't keep you from your work. You've been most kind." She paused at the door, her gaze lingering on the racing forms. "Do take care, Mr. Fenton. Pressure can make even the best of us careless." As she descended the stairs, Miss Marple's mind turned over the encounter. Giles's agitation, the ink on his cuff, the hidden letter with its ominous stamp. They painted a picture of a man stretched thin, like a threadbare cloth. Debt could drive desperate acts, but would a scholar like Giles risk his life's work for a quick gain? She thought not, yet his nerves suggested something unspoken, a secret coiled like a spring. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Giles Fenton, scholarly, proud, but burdened. Debt likely, though he denies its weight. Ink stain fresh, hands unsteady. Loyal to his work, but hiding something." She closed the book, her needles resuming their rhythm. Giles was a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. The thief, she sensed, was someone whose desires ran deeper than money alone. Chapter 4. The Writer's Ambition. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green as Miss Jane Marple approached the cottage of Clara Wren. It was a charming, if slightly unkempt dwelling, its garden overgrown with wildflowers, and its windows framed by peeling paint. Clara, the young writer whose historical novels had stirred local pride, was known for her fiery spirit and relentless drive. Miss Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, had chosen this late afternoon visit to catch Clara in her element, where the mask of propriety might slip. She knocked lightly, and the door swung open to reveal Clara, her auburn hair loose and her eyes bright with the intensity of someone interrupted mid-thought. "Miss Marple?" she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "I wasn't expecting visitors. Is this about the manuscript?" "Only indirectly, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her smile as gentle as a summer breeze. "I was passing by and thought to inquire about your latest work. I've heard such praise for your novels. Might I come in for a moment?" Clara hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing toward a cluttered parlor. The room was a whirlwind of creativity. Manuscripts spilled across a table, books were stacked precariously on chairs, and a typewriter sat like a throne amidst the chaos. A faint scent of lavender and ink hung in the air. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp beneath their mild expression, noted a locked drawer in the desk, its key dangling from a ribbon on Clara's wrist. "Tea?" Clara offered, her tone brisk as she moved to a small stove. "I'm afraid I'm rather busy. My new novel's due soon, and this theft has thrown everything into disarray." "I can imagine," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair with a creak. "The Book of St. Alban must have been a great inspiration for you, such a vivid connection to the past." Clara's face softened, her hands pausing over the kettle. "It was extraordinary," she said, her voice warming. "The illuminations, the script, I spent hours studying it for my book. It's about a medieval scribe, you see, caught in a web of betrayal. The manuscript gave me details no archive could match. Her eyes gleamed, but then darkened. And now it's gone, stolen by some greedy fool who doesn't understand its worth. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly from her bag, a steady counterpoint to Clara's passion. "You must feel its loss keenly," she said, "to have such a treasure in your hands, only to see it vanish. Though I suppose you captured its essence in your notes?" Clara's hand strayed to the key on her wrist. "I took plenty of notes," she said, a touch defensive. "But it's not the same. Holding the real thing, it's like touching history. I was in the office often, studying it, but I left it where it belonged." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "You were there late, I understand, the night before it disappeared?" Clara's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening. "Researching, yes. I often work late. The office is quiet then, perfect for writing. Are you suggesting something, Miss Marple?" "Not at all," Miss Marple said, her smile unwavering. "I only marvel at your dedication. Though I wonder, did you notice anything unusual that night? A visitor, perhaps, or a sound?" Clara turned back to the kettle, her movements brisk. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Tommy was shelving books, Giles was fussing over proofs, and I was at my desk. Lord Carver dropped by earlier, going on about some rare folio, but he left before I did." She poured the tea, her hand steady but her jaw tight. "I locked up my notes and went home. That's all." Miss Marple sipped the tea, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill of Clara's guarded tone. Her eyes drifted to the locked drawer again, then to a smudge of ink on Clara's sleeve, not unlike the one she'd seen on Giles Fenton. "Your work sounds demanding," she said. "Such ambition must take a toll. I knew a young writer once, so eager for success she nearly lost herself to it." Clara's laugh was sharp, like glass breaking. "I'm not that far gone, Miss Marple. I want my work to matter, that's all. The manuscript would have helped, but I don't need it to succeed." She set her cup down with a clink. "If you're looking for a thief, try someone with less to lose. Like Tommy, always skulking about, or Giles with his debts." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "Debts? Mr. Fenton?" Clara flushed, realizing her slip. "Village talk," she said quickly. "You hear things, but I've said enough. I've got pages to finish." Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "I shan't keep you, my dear. Your dedication is inspiring. Do take care. Such passion can sometimes blind us to what's around us." She paused at the door, glancing back at the locked drawer. "And mind that key. Small things can unlock great troubles." As she stepped into the fading light, Miss Marple's mind was busy. Clara's fervor for her work was genuine, but her quick deflection, her mention of Giles's debts and that locked drawer, suggested a woman guarding more than just her manuscript. Ambition, Miss Marple knew, could be a spark that lit dangerous fires. Had Clara's desire to capture the manuscript's essence driven her to take it? Or was her secrecy merely the protectiveness of a writer over her craft? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Clara Wren, driven, protective, perhaps too possessive. Knows the office well, admits to late hours, locked drawer curious, ink on sleeve, quick to point at others but hiding her own thoughts." She closed the book, her needles clicking like a metronome. Clara was a vibrant thread in this tapestry, but whether she was the thief or merely tangled in the pattern remained to be seen. Chapter 5. The Intern's Anxiety. The morning was crisp in St. Mary Mead, the The kind of day where the air carried a hint of autumn's approach, sharpening the senses. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, made her way to Harrow and Sons, her knitting bag a familiar weight at her side. Her thoughts were on Tommy Blake, the young intern whose nervous demeanor in the tea room had lingered in her mind like a faint but persistent echo. His stammer, his flushed cheeks, the heavy satchel slung over his shoulder, they were small details, but Miss Marple knew that small details often unraveled the tightest knots. The publisher's office was quiet when she arrived, the morning's bustle yet to begin. Tommy was in the back room, a narrow space lined with shelves groaning under the weight of books and ledgers. He was sorting a stack of dusty tomes, his movements jerky, as if he expected a reprimand at any moment. When Miss Marple knocked softly on the doorframe, he started, dropping a book with a thud. "Miss Marple," he exclaimed, his voice catching. I didn't see you there. Did you need something?" "Only a moment of your time, Tommy," she said, her smile as warm as a hearth fire. "I've been meaning to ask about your work here. It must be quite an education, handling such treasures as the Book of St. Alban." Tommy's face reddened, his hands fumbling to retrieve the fallen book. "It was, ma'am. I mean, it's awful it's gone. I just shelve things mostly and catalog. Nothing important." Miss Marple settled onto a stool, her eyes gentle but unyielding, like sunlight through a magnifying glass. "Nonsense, my dear. Every task matters. You must see so much, working late as you do. Mr. Harrow speaks highly of your diligence." Tommy's stammer worsened, his fingers twisting the edge of his frayed jacket. I try, miss. I want to stay on, you see. Get a proper job here. I was in the office late that night, but I didn't see nothing. Nobody, I mean." She nodded, her needles clicking faintly from her bag. "Of course, though it's curious, isn't it? A manuscript vanishing from a locked safe, no sign of a break-in. You must have been close by, cataloging in this very room?" He nodded, his eyes darting to the floor. Yes, ma'am. I was here till near midnight. Just me and the books. Miss Wren was in the main office, writing, and Mr. Fenton left earlier. I didn't hear anything strange, I swear." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the satchel slumped against a shelf, its leather worn and bulging. "That's a heavy bag you carry, Tommy. Books, I suppose? You must be quite dedicated to take your work home." Tommy's blush deepened, and he shuffled toward the satchel, nudging it behind a chair. Just study materials, miss. I'm trying to learn, to be useful. I couldn't take anything like the manuscript." "Of course not," she said, her tone soothing. "Though I recall a boy from my village, years ago, so eager to please his employer, he took on tasks he shouldn't have. Got himself into quite a muddle. Young people often want to prove themselves, don't they?" Tommy swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I just want to do well, Miss Marple. I'd never steal. It's not in me." His voice cracked, and he looked away, his hands trembling. Miss Marple rose, her eyes lingering on the satchel. "I believe you, Tommy. You've a good heart, I can see that. But do be careful. Eagerness can lead one into unexpected corners." She paused, glancing at a faint scuff on the floor near the shelves, similar to the one she'd seen in the main office. "Did you see Lord Carver that evening by chance? He was at the office, I understand." Tommy shook his head too quickly. No, ma'am. I mean, I saw him earlier, talking to Mr. Harrow, but he was gone before I finished." His stammer eased, but his eyes flicked toward the door as if wishing for escape. Miss Marple smiled, patting his arm. "You've been most helpful, Tommy. Keep up your good work, and mind that satchel. It looks heavy enough to strain your shoulder." As she stepped into the main office, Miss Marple's mind was busy. Tommy's anxiety was palpable, his stammer a shield for something, fear, perhaps, or guilt. The satchel intrigued her. Its bulk suggested more than a few books. Was he merely studying, as he claimed, or hiding something else? And that scuff mark, so like the one near the safe. Had Tommy been moving more than books that night? She lingered in the office, pretending to admire a framed print while her eyes scanned the room. A faint smudge on the doorframe caught her attention, barely noticeable, like a whisper of intent. It was near the back room entrance, where Tommy worked. She filed it away, along with his nervous glances and the weight of his satchel. Youth, she knew, could be reckless, but theft required a boldness Tommy seemed to lack. Yet fear could make even the timid act out of character. That evening, by her cottage fire, Miss Marple opened her notebook. She wrote, "Tommy Blake, nervous, eager to please, perhaps too eager. Satchel heavy, contents unclear. Scuff mark in back room, smudge on doorframe. Denies seeing Carver but hesitant. Afraid of something, but what?" She closed the book, her needles clicking like the tick of a clock. Tommy was a fragile thread in this mystery, but whether he was caught in the weave or pulling at it, she could not yet say. Chapter 6. The Collector's Obsession. The afternoon sun draped St. Mary Mead in a soft golden haze as Miss Jane Marple set out for Lord Reginald Carver's estate, a grand Georgian manor perched on the village's edge. Her walk was leisurely, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path, but her mind was anything but idle. Lord Carver, the wealthy collector with a passion for rare books, had lingered in her thoughts since their encounter in the publisher's tea-room. His polished charm, his keen interest in the Book of St. Alban, and his unexpected presence at Harrow & Sons the day before. The theft wove a thread of suspicion she could not ignore. Her knitting bag swung lightly at her side, a quiet companion to her sharp observations. Carver Hall was a vision of elegance, its ivy-clad facade and manicured lawns speaking of old money and meticulous care. Miss Marple had been invited under the guise of discussing a local charity auction, a pretext she'd arranged through Mrs. Bantry, whose social connections opened doors even Miss Marple's reputation could not always unlock. The butler, a stern man with eyes like polished flint, ushered her into a vast library that smelled of leather and aged paper. Shelves soared to the ceiling, filled with volumes that gleamed with the weight of history. Lord Carver stood by a window, his silhouette framed against the light, a glass of sherry in hand. "Miss Marple, a delight," he said, his voice smooth as the silk of his cravat. "I trust the walk was pleasant. Please, make yourself comfortable." He gestured to a plush armchair, his smile as inviting as it was practiced. "It was most refreshing, Lord Carver," she replied, settling into the chair, her knitting bag at her feet. "Your library is quite remarkable. I've heard you're a man of discerning taste, particularly in rare manuscripts." His eyes lit with a flicker of pride. "You flatter me. Books are my passion, my refuge. Each one tells a story beyond its pages, centuries of hands that held it, minds that cherished it." He moved to a shelf, his fingers brushing a row of leather-bound tomes. "The Book of St. Alban was such a treasure. Its loss is a tragedy for us all." Miss Marple's needles clicked faintly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. "Indeed," she said. To think someone could take such a piece from a locked safe without a trace, it suggests a certain intimacy with the publisher's office, don't you think? Carver's smile didn't waver, but his fingers tightened slightly on his glass. A clever thief, no doubt, though I wonder why anyone would steal something so difficult to sell. A collector, perhaps, driven by desire rather than profit. He sipped his sherry, his eyes never leaving hers. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the shelves. A gap, subtle but noticeable, caught her eye, a space where a book the size of the Book of St. Alban might fit. "You visited Harrow & Sons the day before the theft, I believe," she said, her tone light. "To discuss an acquisition," Mr. Harrow said. "You must know the office well." "I've been a frequent visitor," Carver admitted, setting his glass down. "Harrow's. Acquired some fine pieces over the years, and I enjoy advising on their preservation. But I assure you, Miss Marple, I was long gone before any mischief occurred." He leaned against a table, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, like a hawk watching prey. "Of course," she said, her smile as gentle as a breeze. "Though I recall a collector in my youth, such a charming man, who took a rare psalter from a church, convinced it was safer in his care. Passion can make one possessive." Carver laughed, a rich sound that filled the room. "A fair point, but I'm no thief. My collection is built through honest means, though I'll confess I coveted that manuscript. Who wouldn't? Its illuminations were divine." He gestured to a display case where a medieval prayer book lay open, its colors vibrant even in the soft light. "But I prefer my treasures to be legally mine." Miss Marple rose, approaching the case, her eyes lingering on the prayer book. "Exquisite," she murmured, noting its size, similar to the stolen manuscript. "You must take great care to protect such pieces. Hidden panels, perhaps, or secret safes?" Carver's smile tightened just for a moment. "Nothing so dramatic," he said. "Good locks and a vigilant staff suffice." He moved to escort her to another shelf, as if to steer her from the case. "Would you like to see my Chaucer? It's a first edition." She indulged him, admiring the volume while her mind catalogued his responses. His charm was a polished shield, but that fleeting tension, the gap on the shelf, and his presence at the office hinted at something beneath the surface. "You're most kind," she said, returning to her chair. "Though I wonder, did you notice anything odd during your visit to Harrow & Sons? A nervous glance, perhaps, or an unexpected visitor?" Carver shook his head, his expression one of polite regret. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Harrow was his usual fastidious self, Giles was buried in proofs, and young Tommy was tripping over his own feet. Miss Wren, I recall, was scribbling away, lost in her world. A typical day." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking like a metronome. "How observant you are," she said. "It's a gift, isn't it, to see so much and say so little." She rose, smoothing her shawl. "I mustn't keep you, Lord Carver. This library is a treasure in itself. Do mind your gaps, though. Empty spaces can tell their own stories." As she left the manor, the butler closing the door behind her, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of threads. Carver's obsession with rare books was clear, but was it enough to drive him to theft? The gap on his shelf, his ease in the office, his quick dismissal of suspicion, they were like stitches in a pattern not yet complete. She recalled a collector she'd known in her youth, whose love for art had led him to pilfer a painting, convinced it was his destiny to own it. Passion, she knew, could twist even the most refined soul. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Lord Carver, charming, controlled, but possessive. Gap in library suggestive, knowledge of office intimate. Denies involvement, but too smooth, too present. A collector's heart may covet beyond reason." She closed the book, her needles resuming their steady rhythm. Carver was a vibrant thread in this mystery, his motives as rich and complex as the books he cherished. Whether he was the thief or merely a player in the game, she would need to watch him closely. Chapter 7. A Clue in the Dust. The morning light filtered through the leaded windows of Harrow & Sons, casting a soft glow over the publisher's office as Miss Jane Marple stepped inside. The village of St. Mary Mead was stirring, its usual hum of activity muted by the lingering scandal of the stolen manuscript. Miss Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, had returned to the scene of the crime, driven by a quiet certainty that the room held secrets yet to be uncovered. Her visits to Giles Fenton, Clara Wren, Tommy Blake, and Lord Carver had painted a vivid picture of motives and masks, but the physical evidence, the silent witnesses of wood and dust, called her back. Mr. Harrow greeted her with a weary nod, his face etched with the strain of sleepless nights. "Miss Marple, you're kind to keep troubling yourself with this," he said, his voice heavy. "The constable's been poking about, but he's no closer to answers. I'm beginning to think the Book of St. Alban is lost forever." "Nonsense, Mr. Harrow," she replied, her tone brisk but kind. "Things are rarely lost for good. They're merely misplaced, waiting for the right eyes to find them." She smiled, her eyes already scanning the room with the precision of a seamstress inspecting a hem. The office was much as she'd left it. The heavy oak desk, the portrait of the stern-faced nobleman concealing the safe, the shelves groaning with books and manuscripts. Yet Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the smaller details, the ones others overlooked. She moved to the safe, now closed but unlocked, and crouched with a grace that belied her years. The metal was cold under her fingers, its surface smooth except for a faint smudge of dust, disturbed as if by a careless touch. She noted its position near the lock, where a hand might have rested while entering the combination. "Curious," she murmured, straightening. Her gaze drifted to the floor, where the scuff mark she'd noticed before, a faint arc of abrasion near the desk, stood out in the morning light. It was not the mark of a careless foot, she thought, but of something dragged, perhaps a chair or a box. She followed the line of the mark to a high shelf where a thin layer of dust had been unsettled, leaving a clean patch shaped like a rectangle. "Something was moved here," she said softly, her voice barely reaching Mr. Harrow, who hovered anxiously nearby. "What's that, Miss Marple?" he asked, stepping closer. "Have you found something?" "Only a thought," she replied, her eyes still on the shelf. "This office is well kept, yet dust gathers in forgotten places. When it's disturbed, it tells a story. Tell me, Mr. Harrow, are these shelves often rearranged?" He frowned, scratching his chin. "Not often. Tommy handles the cataloging, but he's careful. Giles might shift things for editing, and Miss Wren sometimes pulls books for research, but nothing's been moved since the theft. I'm sure of it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the window. It was locked, as Mr. Harrow had said, but she tested the latch, finding it firm yet slightly loose, as if it had been worked at with a tool. "And this window," she said, "you're certain it was secure that night?" "Checked it myself," Mr. Harrow said, his voice firm. "No one could have got in that way without breaking the glass." "Perhaps," she said, her tone non-committal. She stepped back, her eyes sweeping the room once more. The scuff mark, the dust, the latch, they were like stitches in a pattern, each pointing to someone familiar with the office's rhythms. "Might I see the log of visitors from that week? It could be helpful." Mr. Harrow produced a ledger, its pages filled with neat entries. Miss Marple scanned the list, noting the names: Giles Fenton, Clara Wren, Tommy Blake, and on the day before the theft, Lord Carver, logged for a consultation lasting nearly an hour. "Lord Carver stayed rather long," she remarked, her voice light. "Was that usual?" "He's a valued client," Mr. Harrow said, a touch defensive. "He was interested in the manuscript, of course, and we discussed its display for the exhibition. Nothing out of the ordinary." "Of course," Miss Marple said, closing the ledger. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Harrow. I'll not take more of your time." She paused at the door, her eyes lingering on the scuff mark. "Do keep an eye on this room. It has more to say, I think." As she walked back to her cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts were a tangle of threads. The disturbed dust, the scuff mark, the loose latch. They suggested a thief who knew the office intimately, someone who could move without arousing suspicion. Giles, with his access to the safe's combination. Clara, with her late-night research. Tommy, lingering in the back room. Or Carver, whose visit seemed too perfectly timed. Each had opportunity, but the physical clues pointed to a deliberate act, not a spur-of-the-moment theft. That evening, by her fire, Miss Marple opened her notebook. She wrote, "Office clues, dust disturbed on shelf, scuff mark by desk, loose latch on window, suggests familiarity, perhaps a planned act. Carver's visit notable, his time in office lengthy. Someone moved something. But what? And why no forced entry?" She closed the book, her needles clicking like the pulse of her thoughts. The office was a silent witness, and its whispers were beginning to form a pattern. One she would follow to its end. Chapter 8. The Village Gossip. The late August air was heavy with the scent of honeysuckle as Miss Jane Marple made her rounds through St. Mary Mead, her steps measured but purposeful. The village, with its quaint cottages and bustling shops, was a tapestry of whispers, and Miss Marple knew better than most how to gather its threads. The theft of the Book of St. Alban had set tongues wagging, and she intended to listen. For gossip, like dust, often revealed what polished surfaces concealed. Her knitting bag swung gently at her side, a quiet companion to her keen observations. Her first stop was the post office, where Mrs. Price, the postmistress, presided over her counter like a queen over her court. The bell above the door jingled as Miss Marple entered, her smile as disarming as ever. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," she said, setting a small parcel on the counter. "Just a few letters to post, and perhaps a moment to chat?" Mrs. Price, her eyes bright with the prospect of news, leaned forward. "Miss Marple, you're a sight for sore eyes. This business with the manuscript, everyone's talking. Such a scandal for our little village." She lowered her voice, though the post office was empty. "I heard Lord Carver's car was seen near Harrow & Sons late that evening. Parked by the lane, it was, when most folks were abed." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, her needles clicking faintly from her bag. "Indeed? How curious. Lord Carver is such a respectable gentleman, but I suppose even he might have business after hours." Mrs. Price sniffed, sorting stamps with a practiced hand. Business or not, it's odd. And young Tommy Blake, always lugging that heavy satchel of his. My nephew saw him leaving the office near midnight, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Scared he was, or so it seemed. Poor boy, Miss Marple murmured, her mind filing the detail away. He's so eager to please, isn't he? Though I wonder what could frighten him so. Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. And Miss Wren, don't tell me she's all innocence. My cousin's girl works for Mr. Harrow's housekeeper, and she says Clara's been at the office at all hours, poking about. Research, she calls it, but who needs to research at midnight? Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest. Writers are such dedicated souls, though I suppose late hours give one opportunities. She thanked Mrs. Price and stepped out, her thoughts already turning to her next stop. The bakery was next, its warm aroma of fresh bread a contrast to the post office's inky air. Mrs. Baker, the baker's wife, was dusting flour from her hands as Miss Marple entered, her knitting bag brushing the counter. "A loaf of your rye, please, Mrs. Baker," she said, "and perhaps a word about this dreadful theft. The village seems quite stirred." Mrs. Baker's eyes gleamed as she wrapped the loaf. "Stirred and then some, Miss Marple. It's all anyone talks about. I heard from the milkman that Giles Fenton's been jumpy as a cat lately. Something about debts, cards, they say. He was in here last week, looking like he hadn't slept in days." "Dear me," Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic. "Mr. Fenton does carry such responsibility at the publishers. It must weigh heavily." "That's not all," Mrs. Baker said, lowering her voice. "My husband saw Lord Carver at the pub the night before the theft, talking to some stranger, sharp-looking fellow, not from here. They were thick as thieves, if you'll pardon the expression, and left in a hurry." Miss Marple's needles paused, a faint click echoing in her bag. "How very interesting," she said. "Lord Carver does keep intriguing company. And young Tommy, has he been about?" Mrs. Baker nodded, slicing another loaf. "Oh, aye, always rushing in for a bun, that boy, with that satchel weighing him down. Nervous as anything, dropping coins half the time. If you ask me, he's hiding something, though he's too sweet to be a thief, don't you think?" "Youth can be so unpredictable," Miss Marple said, paying for her bread. "Thank you, Mrs. Baker. You've a knack for noticing things." Her final stop was the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, was tending her roses. Miss Marple joined her, ostensibly to admire the blooms, but her questions were as precise as her knitting stitches. "This theft has upset the village terribly," she said, clipping a wilted bud with borrowed shears. "I heard Clara Wren's been working late at the publishers. Such dedication." Mrs. Clement, ever gentle, frowned slightly. "Dedication, perhaps, but reckless. My maid heard from the grocer that Clara's been secretive, locking away her papers. And Tommy, poor lad, he's been so anxious. The sexton saw him lingering by the churchyard gate one evening, clutching that satchel like it held his life's savings." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was sharp. How distressing for him. And Lord Carver, such a prominent figure. Has he been about? "Oh, yes," Mrs. Clement said, brushing dirt from her hands. "He was at the church last Sunday, offering to fund repairs for the organ. Generous, but I don't know. There's something in his eyes, like a man who wants more than he lets on." Miss Marple thanked her and returned home, the village's whispers weaving a pattern in her mind. Mrs. Price's tale of Carver's car Mrs. Baker's hint of his mysterious companion, and Mrs. Clement's observations of Clara and Tommy, they were like threads in a tapestry, each revealing a glimpse of the truth. Carver's late-night presence was troubling, Tommy's anxiety suggestive, Clara's secrecy intriguing, and Giles's debts a persistent shadow. That evening, by her cottage fire, Miss Marple opened her notebook. She wrote, "Gossip, Carver's car near office late, with stranger at pub. Tommy anxious, satchel heavy, seen late. Clara secretive, late night work. Giles's debts confirmed, demeanor strained. Village sees much, but truth lies in what's unsaid." She closed the book, her needles clicking steadily. The gossip had tightened the weave of her suspicions, and she felt the pattern of the theft drawing closer to its center. Chapter 9. A Trap is Set. The soft glow of dawn crept over St. Mary Mead, painting the rooftops with a delicate light as Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles idle for once. The threads of the mystery surrounding the Book of St. Alban were beginning to form a pattern in her mind, but it was not yet complete. The clues, the disturbed dust, the scuff mark, the loose latch, the village gossip, pointed to a thief who moved with familiarity and purpose, but the final stitch eluded her. Giles Fenton's debts, Clara Wren's secrecy, Tommy Blake's anxiety, and Lord Carver's polished presence each held a piece of the puzzle. But to reveal the truth, Miss Marple decided to set a gentle trap, as subtle as a spider's web. She began by visiting Mr. Harrow at his office, her demeanor as unassuming as ever. The publisher was pacing, his face drawn with worry, the weight of the theft still heavy on his shoulders. "Miss Marple," he greeted, his voice tinged with hope. "Have you any news? The exhibition is tomorrow, and without the manuscript, we're a laughingstock." "Patience, Mr. Harrow," she said, her smile reassuring. "I've a small idea that might help. Would you be so kind as to spread a rumor? Nothing grand, just a whisper that the constable has found a new lead, a fingerprint on the safe, perhaps. Let it slip to your staff, and see that it reaches Lord Carver as well." Mr. Harrow's brow furrowed. A fingerprint, but there was none. The constable said the safe was clean. "Precisely," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "But a thief who believes they've left a trace may grow careless. Let the rumor spread naturally, through the tea-room, perhaps, and do keep the office locked tonight with the constable nearby. I have a feeling our culprit may wish to check on things." Mr. Harrow nodded, though his expression betrayed his skepticism. "If you think it will help, I'll do it. But I hope you know what you're doing, Miss Marple." "I usually do," she replied, her tone light but her mind sharp as a needle. She left the office, her knitting bag swinging gently, and made her way to the village hall, where a meeting about the upcoming exhibition was scheduled. It was the perfect setting to observe her suspects, their reactions to the rumor a potential key to their guilt. The hall was abuzz with villagers, their chatter a mix of excitement for the exhibition and speculation about the theft. Miss Marple slipped into a seat near the back, her eyes scanning the crowd. Giles Fenton stood by a table, adjusting his spectacles and fidgeting with a pen, his face pale. Clara Wren sat near the front, her notebook open but her pen still, her gaze darting about as if expecting trouble. Tommy Blake hovered by the door, his satchel clutched tightly, his stammer evident even in his whispered greetings to passers-by. Lord Carver, impeccable in a tailored suit, was speaking with Mrs. Bantry, his charm as polished as ever. Mr. Harrow took the stage, his voice steady but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "despite the loss of the Book of St. Alban, the exhibition will proceed, and I'm pleased to say the constable has a new lead, a fingerprint found on the safe, which may bring us closer to the thief." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Miss Marple's eyes were fixed on her suspects. Giles's hand froze on his pen, his lips parting slightly as he glanced toward the door. Clara's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on her notebook, a flash of anger crossing her face. Tommy's face drained of color, his satchel slipping slightly as he gripped it harder, his stammered apology to a neighbor barely audible. Lord Carver's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his hand brushing his pocket as if checking something, before he resumed his conversation with Mrs. Bantry, his composure restored. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her bag, a quiet rhythm against the hum of the crowd. Each reaction was a thread, and she wove them carefully in her mind. Giles's nervousness suggested fear of exposure. Clara's anger hinted at a protective instinct. Tommy's panic spoke of vulnerability, and Carver's brief lapse betrayed a man accustomed to control. The rumor had stirred them, as she'd hoped, but the trap needed one more element to spring. She approached the constable after the meeting, a young man named Harris, earnest but out of his depth. "Constable," she said, her voice low, "would you be so kind as to keep watch near Harrow and Sons tonight? Discreetly, mind you. Station yourself in the lane where you can see the office window. If someone comes, note their actions, but don't intervene unless necessary." Harris blinked, scratching his head. "You think the thief will come back, Miss Marple? After a fingerprint rumor?" "People are curious creatures," she said, her smile enigmatic. "They return to the scene of their mistakes, especially when they fear they've left something behind." That night, Miss Marple sat by her cottage window, her knitting idle as she watched the stars emerge. She had no need to be at the office herself. Constable Harris was capable enough for observation, and her presence might deter the very reaction she sought. Instead, she let her mind wander over the day's events, the suspects' faces replaying like a film. Giles's trembling hands, Clara's guarded glare, Tommy's frightened eyes, Carver's fleeting unease. They were all pieces of a pattern, and the trap would reveal which thread pulled tightest. At dawn, Constable Harris knocked on her door, his face flushed with excitement. "Miss Marple," he said, "you were right. Someone came to the office last night, near midnight. I was hidden in the lane, like you said. It was Lord Carver. Tried the window. He did, fiddling with the latch. When it wouldn't give, he slipped away, quick as you like. I didn't stop him, as you said, but I saw it clear." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression remained serene. "Well done, Constable. You've been most observant. Did he carry anything? A bag, perhaps?" "Nothing I could see," Harris said. "Just his coat, hands in his pockets. Looked like he was checking something, not breaking in." "Thank you, Constable," she said, patting his arm. "You've given me just what I needed." As Harris left, Miss Marple returned to her parlor, her notebook open. She wrote, "Trap set. Fingerprint rumor stirred all. Giles nervous, Clara angry, Tommy panicked, Carver unsettled. Carver at window, midnight, testing latch. No bag, but intent clear. A collector's fear of exposure?" She closed the book, her needles resuming their rhythm. The trap had caught a glimpse of the truth, and Lord Carver's nocturnal visit was a bold stitch in the pattern, one she would follow to its end. Chapter 10. The Collector's Confession. The morning after Constable Harris's report, St. Mary Mead awoke to a sky streaked with clouds, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles still, her mind weaving the threads of the trap she had set. Lord Carver's midnight visit to Harrow and Sons, caught tampering with the office window, was a bold stroke in the pattern of the theft of the Book of St. Albanian. His actions, coupled with the gap in his library, his intimate knowledge of the publisher's office, and the village gossip about his late-night presence, pointed to a man whose polished exterior might conceal a thief's heart. Yet Miss Marple knew that suspicion was not proof, and she needed to confront him with the precision of a needle threading a delicate stitch. She arranged to meet Lord Carver at his manor under the pretext of discussing the charity auction, a ruse that allowed her to enter his world without arousing suspicion. As she walked the gravel path to Carver Hall, her shawl drawn against the damp air, her knitting bag felt heavier, as if carrying the weight of her purpose. The butler admitted her with a curt nod, and she was led once more to the grand library, where the scent of leather and old paper enveloped her like a familiar friend. Lord Carver stood by a roaring fire, his demeanor as suave as ever, though his eyes held a wary glint. "Miss Marple, always a pleasure," he said, gesturing to a velvet armchair. "I trust the auction plans are progressing, or is there another matter on your mind?" His tone was light, but his fingers toyed with a gold watch chain, a subtle sign of unease. Miss Marple settled into the chair, her smile serene, but her gaze sharp. "The auction is coming along nicely, Lord Carver, but I confess I've another purpose today. This dreadful business with the manuscript. It weighs on the village, and I've been asked to lend a hand." Carver's smile tightened, his hand stilling on the watch chain. "A noble effort, but surely the constable is better suited to such matters. What can I do for you?" She leaned forward, her needles clicking faintly from her bag, a steady rhythm against the crackle of the fire. "You were seen at Harrow and Sons last night, Lord Carver, testing the office window. A curious time for a visit, don't you think? Especially after the rumor of a fingerprint on the safe." His face remained composed, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Seen? By whom? I was merely passing by, concerned for the office's security after this theft. A locked window is no crime, Miss Marple." "Of course not," she said, her voice gentle as a breeze. "But a man of your discernment, lingering at midnight, suggests a certain interest. I noticed a gap in your library, you see, just the size for the Book of St. Albanian, and your visit to the office the day before the theft was rather lengthy. Was it not?" Carver's eyes narrowed, his charm giving way to a steely edge. "You're treading dangerous ground, Miss Marple. Are you accusing me of theft? I'm a collector, not a criminal. My library is open to scrutiny, every book legally acquired." Miss Marple's needles clicked on, unruffled. "I accuse no one, Lord Carver, but I've known collectors before, fine men, driven by passion, who believed certain treasures belonged with them alone. A scuff mark in the office, dust disturbed on a shelf, a latch not quite secure. These suggest someone who knew the place well. Someone like you." He rose, pacing to the window, his back to her. "This is absurd," he said, his voice low. "I admired the manuscript, yes, but I'd never stoop to stealing it. You've no proof, only village gossip and your own fancies." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her words were precise. Proof is a curious thing, Lord Carver. It's not always in fingerprints or broken locks. It's in the heart, greed, obsession, the need to possess. I think you took the Book of St. Alban, not for money, but because you couldn't bear to see it in another's hands. It's here, isn't it? Hidden, perhaps, behind a panel or in a secret drawer. Carver turned, his face pale, his composure cracking like thin ice. "You're relentless," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He sank into a chair, his hands gripping the arms. "Very well. I took it. I couldn't resist. Its beauty. Its history. It belonged in my library, not some public display for gawkers. I slipped into the office that night, used the latch I knew was weak. The combination, I'd seen Harrow enter it once, months ago. It was simple enough." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet sorrow. "And where is it now?" He gestured to a bookcase, his hand trembling. "Behind a false panel, third shelf. I meant no harm, only to keep it safe, to cherish it." She rose, her needles silent. "You must return it, Lord Carver. Beauty is not owned, it's shared. The constable will be discreet for the village's sake, but the manuscript must go back to Harrow and Sons." Carver nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I'll see to it. You have my word." As Miss Marple left the manor, the first drops of rain began to fall, softening the gravel beneath her feet. She felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that the pattern was complete. Carver's obsession had undone him, as she'd suspected, but the confession was a delicate thread, one that required care to keep the village's peace. Back at her cottage, she opened her notebook by the firelight. She wrote, "Carver confesses, took manuscript for his collection, hidden behind panel. Motive obsession, not greed. Latch and combination known to him. Return assured, discretion advised." She closed the book, her needles resuming their rhythm, a steady pulse of resolution, in the quiet night. Chapter 11. The Loose Ends. The rain that had begun the previous evening lingered into the morning, cloaking St. Mary Mead in a fine mist that softened the edges of its cottages and lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, though her thoughts were far from the gray scarf taking shape in her lap. Lord Carver's confession had been the pivotal stitch in the mystery of the Book of St. Alban, but as with any intricate pattern, there were loose ends to be tied off. Giles Fenton, Clara Wren, and Tommy Blake each carried their own burdens, and Miss Marple, with her unerring sense of human nature, knew that clarity for one meant clarity for all. She began her day with a visit to Harrow and Sons, where the manuscript had been quietly returned under the constable's supervision. Mr. Harrow, his face alight with relief, greeted her with a fervor that bordered on reverence. "Miss Marple, it's a miracle," he exclaimed, gesturing to the safe, now securely holding the Book of St. Albanian. "The constable brought it back this morning, no questions asked. He said you had a hand in it." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with quiet amusement. "I merely pointed out a few threads, Mr. Harrow. The constable did the rest, but I'd like a word with your staff, if I may, to put their minds at ease." Mr. Harrow nodded eagerly, summoning Giles, Clara, and Tommy to the tea-room. The small space, with its faded prints and lingering scent of scones, felt less tense than before, though the air still held a trace of unease. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet, and regarded the trio with her gentle, piercing gaze. "The manuscript is back where it belongs," she began, her voice soft but clear. "And I thought it best to clear the air, for suspicion can linger like dust in a neglected corner. Mr. Fenton, your dedication to your work is admirable, but I couldn't help noticing your strain. Those debts you carry, cards, I believe, must be a heavy load." Giles's face flushed, his spectacles slipping down his nose. I don't deny it, Miss Marple," he stammered. "I've had troubles, yes, but I'd never steal. My work is my pride." He held up his hands, the faint ink stain still visible on his cuff. "This? Just from editing, nothing more. I swear it." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking faintly. "I believe you, Mr. Fenton. The ink is innocent enough, and your loyalty to Harrow and Sons is clear. But do seek help for those debts. There's no shame in it." She turned to Clara, whose auburn hair caught the light as she clutched her notebook. "Miss Wren, your passion for your craft is inspiring, but your secrecy, those late nights, that locked drawer, raised questions. I suspect it holds only your novel, yes?" Clara's eyes flashed, but she nodded, unlocking the drawer with the key on her wrist to reveal a thick manuscript. "My draft," she said, her voice tight. "I guard it fiercely, but I'd never take the manuscript. I studied it, yes, but only for my work." She gestured to her sleeve, where an ink smudge mirrored Giles's. "Just ink from my pen, nothing sinister." Miss Marple's smile was warm. "Your ambition is a fire, my dear, but let it warm, not burn. Your talent needs no stolen treasures." Finally, she looked at Tommy, who stood by the door, his satchel clutched tightly, his stammer betraying his nerves. "Tommy, your eagerness to please is a virtue, but your anxiety made you seem guilty. That satchel, what does it hold?" Tommy's face reddened, and he opened the bag, revealing a stack of library books and study notes. Just books, miss," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm studying to get better, to stay on here. I was in the back room that night, but I didn't see nothing. I mean, anything." Miss Marple patted his arm. "You've a good heart, Tommy. Your diligence will carry you far, but don't let fear make you seem something you're not." The trio exchanged glances, their relief palpable, though a trace of embarrassment lingered. Miss Marple rose, her shawl neat around her shoulders. "The thief has been found," she said, "and no more need be said. Let's put this behind us for the exhibition's sake." As she left the tea-room, Miss Marple felt the weight of their gratitude, but her mind lingered on the smaller details, the ink stains, the satchel, the scuff marks. Each had been a distraction, a thread that seemed vital but led nowhere. The true pattern had been Carver's obsession, his intimate knowledge of the office, and his midnight return to cover his tracks. Yet she had ensured his confession remained discreet, sparing the village a scandal. Back at her cottage, she opened her notebook by the firelight. She wrote, "Loose ends tied, Giles's debts no motive, ink from work. Clara's secrecy, her novel, not theft. Tommy's satchel innocent, his fear of failure. Carver alone guilty, case closed quietly." She closed the book, her needles clicking like a satisfied sigh. The mystery was resolved, but human nature, with its flaws and fears, remained her truest study. Chapter 12. The Quiet Return. The mist had lifted from St. Mary Mead, and the village basked in the gentle warmth of a late August afternoon. The sun, filtering through the elms, cast dappled shadows on the cobblestones as Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. The return of the Book of St. Alban to Harrow and Sons had restored a sense of order to the village, and the exhibition, now underway, drew crowds from beyond St. Mary Mead's borders. Yet Miss Marple, her gray scarf lengthening in her lap, felt no urge to join the throng. Her work was done, and she preferred the quiet of her cottage, where the world's complexities could be unraveled in peace. The morning had brought a visit from Mr. Harrow, his face alight with gratitude. "Miss Marple," he said, standing in her parlor with a bouquet of roses from his garden, "the exhibition is a triumph, thanks to you. The manuscript is the star, and no one's the wiser about, well, you know." His voice dropped, as if even in her cottage the walls might carry tales of Lord Carver's indiscretion. Miss Marple accepted the roses with a smile, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "You're too kind, Mr. Harrow. I only listened to what the village was saying, and what it wasn't. The manuscript belongs where it can be shared, not hidden away." Mr. Harrow hesitated, then added, "Lord Carver sent a generous donation for the exhibition's security. He asked me to convey his respects, but said he'd be away for a time. A trip abroad, I believe." "A wise choice," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral, but her mind noting the collector's retreat. Discretion had preserved his reputation, and she suspected his absence would allow the village to heal without the stain of scandal. She waved Mr. Harrow off with a promise to attend the exhibition's closing, though she had no intention of crowding into the hall. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple took her tea in the garden, the roses now in a vase beside her. The village was quiet, its usual hum softened by the satisfaction of a mystery resolved. She thought of Giles Fenton, whose debts would need careful management, but whose loyalty to his work was unshaken. Clara Wren, her ambition a blazing fire, would channel her passion into her novels, her locked drawer no longer a source of suspicion. Tommy Blake, with his nervous stammer and heavy satchel, would find his place, his eagerness tempered by new-found confidence. And Lord Carver, whose obsession had led him astray, would perhaps learn that beauty was not to be possessed, but appreciated. Her needles clicked, a steady pulse against the rustle of leaves. The case had been a delicate one, woven from the threads of human nature: greed, ambition, fear, and obsession. Each suspect had revealed a facet of the human heart, but it was Carver's desire, sharp as a blade, that had cut through the fabric of trust. The scuff mark, the disturbed dust, the loose latch, the midnight visit, they were the stitches that led her to him, guided by the village's whispers and her own quiet observations. Cherry, her maid, appeared with a fresh pot of tea, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Miss Marple, everyone's saying the exhibition's a marvel. Aren't you going to see it? You solved the whole thing, after all." Miss Marple chuckled, setting her knitting aside. "I've seen enough, Cherry. The manuscript is where it belongs, and that's what matters. Besides, I've a scarf to finish before the autumn chill." Cherry shook her head, grinning. "You're a wonder, miss. The way you figured it out, nobody'd guess it was you pulling the strings." "Not strings, my dear," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "Just threads, carefully woven." She sipped her tea, her gaze drifting to the horizon. The village would talk for a while, spinning tales of the theft, but the truth would remain. Her quiet secret, shared only with those who needed to know. As evening fell, Miss Marple moved to her parlor, the fire casting a warm glow over her notebook. She opened it one last time, writing, "Case resolved. Manuscript returned. Carver's guilt concealed for village's sake. Giles, Clara, Tommy cleared. Their flaws mere shadows. Human nature, as ever, the true mystery." She closed the book, her needles resuming their dance, each click a testament to the quiet justice she had wrought. St. Mary Mead would sleep soundly tonight, and Miss Marple, with her unassuming wisdom, would watch over it, ready for the next tangle in the village's tapestry.